Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Automotive Panel. We are very limited with time today, so I'm going to get right to it. I'm going to be moderating with GM, Toyota, and Magna. A little bit about myself. AceTronic is a 34-year young company. We are a CAMSC certified supplier, and in fact, we are a supplier to a number of Magna facilities, as well as a great many Tier 1 suppliers that feed into both GM and Toyota. AceTronic provides auxiliary equipment along with a variety of MRO products to plastic processors. I'm very honored to be here today, and without further delay, I'd like to allow each of our presenters today to give us a little bit of an intro into themselves. So we'll start off with Reggie, and we'll hear a little bit about Reggie today.
Good morning, all. So Reggie Humphrey, I lead GM supplier engagement activities, which encompasses our supplier diversity program. Supplier diversity program was born in 1968 out of the very same civil unrest that you see in the United States today. So although it's a historic mark, it reminds us of how much work is left to do. I'm a 25-year veteran within a couple of weeks now of General Motors. I've been in multiple assignments from manufacturing to purchasing, order fulfillment, logistics, and now leading our supplier engagement team. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to share with our CAMSC team. I'm a former CAMSC board member. I have since asked one of my team members to join that CAMSC board, Sarah Webb, who's our supplier engagement manager. And we will do everything we can to continue to support the great work that the CAMSC and all of its constituents represent. So thank you for having me, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And Chuck.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kim, and I'm happy to be here. Just as Reggie mentioned, my name is Chuck Hendricks. I'm the Senior Manager of Supplier Diversity at Toyota. I lead all of our supplier diversity efforts in North America, including our new headquarters down, well, somewhat new, 3 years, headquarters down in Plano, Texas. Toyota has a long history, just like Reggie mentioned, not as long and distinguished as GM with regard to supplier diversity efforts. We're at about 30 years engaged in supplier diversity, and I've been at Toyota now 24 years. Oh, actually, next month will be 24 years. Prior to that, I spent another 7 years at a company that starts with the letter H. So I've been in Japanese automotive manufacturing for 30 plus years, and I'm happy to be here today to share some processes and thoughts regarding supplier diversity. Longtime member of CAMSC as well. We're not board members, but we're avid supporters and of the CAMSC initiative, as well as all things Canada as well. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chuck. And next we have Ellyn with Magna.
Morning, everyone. My name is Ellyn Rogers, and I'm a global category manager for Magna, and I work in the electronics division. And I've been with Magna now for 18 years, with another division that Magna bought, another organization that Magna bought, and I've been in procurement my whole career. So I'm thankful to be here, and I'm excited, and most of you Canadians know Magna, so I don't need to make an introduction for Magna. Thank you.
All right, yes, and we are all very excited to be here today. So, you know, they've talked a lot about disruptive technologies, but I don't ever think anybody thought there'd be a disruptive pandemic that would kind of show its ugly head. So here we are in the middle of a pandemic, and I don't think there's going to be conferences that we're going to be attending in person for quite some time. So I'm wanting to know from each of you, how do you feel about this forum? Because I think that the virtual conference is where it's going to be for the next year, maybe even longer, possibly. We'll start off with Chuck.
Yeah, the virtual side of things is a new dynamic for all of us. I think all of us have been used to and accustomed to of actually seeing each other face to face, shaking a hand, taking a brochure or having some discussions in face to face timing. But what I found over these last, where are we now? 4 months of working from home, that we've done just about everything that we possibly can within the automotive industry to adapt. And that's what we do. You know, the automotive industry is one of these things, you never know what's going to happen day to day. And how you adapt to that has been, you know, will determine whether or not you're successful in those changing times. So in reference to kind of cut to the chase from our virtual world, in all honesty, Reggie will probably say the same thing, I think. I'm working harder from home and having those engagements with suppliers, either by email or by webcam, teleconference, however you want to call it. But I think that change in dynamic is something that we're going to have to get used to. In all honesty, a procurement perspective, it's given, at least me personally, it's given me a more inroad with our procurement group. They're apt to having a teleconference with a potential supplier if there's a business need, which I can't stress that enough. Those 15, 20-minute, 30-minute meetings, I'm able to grab those buying members and say, hey, I think I've got a good candidate here for something that we have a business for. There's a connection and buyers to introduce themselves. So Kim, I don't want to haul things up, but you're right. I do not see us being back in a phase mode.
Sorry, we're losing some sound on you, Chuck. I don't know if that's happening for everybody. Just very quickly, if anybody, whether it's on the panel or in the audience that's joining us today, if you're experiencing any technical issues, just put a quick note in the Q&A, and we'll get our team in the back to take care of that.
Well, and Kim, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
I think this is a classic where Chuck was going, right? In this virtual environment, we have to be prepared to adapt at all times. It's just what he said, right? You're going to have technical issues, right? I mean, you couldn't plan it better, right? Chuck's voice breaks up in the middle of him explaining the value of virtual conferences, right? So, but I think this is where we all have to be very flexible in our thinking. We have to be flexible in our approach, and certainly to Chuck's point, the adaptability of the automotive industry has always been evident, because you can't survive in this market if you don't have that adaptability. So, I mean, what I'm going to say is everything from the cultural norms that we're accustomed to, which is, you know, your kids, your dog may show up in the middle of a meeting. You may have to pause a meeting to actually take care of an issue with the family. This is something that we all, you know, when I talk about what we're doing now, especially in the diversity and inclusion discipline, and specifically in a virtual work environment, there's a two-way road of empathy that we need to have, right? And I think this is where the Chuck's point about, I mean, right now I probably have 1,500 emails in my inbox, and that doesn't count other social media platforms like LinkedIn where people are reaching out. You know, we will finish this conference and I will have several messages in LinkedIn that I cannot get to, right? So I think that there's still a level of patience that's required, no different than when we leave a live trade show. There's a lot of follow-up activities. I think what this has offered is that I am, to Chuck's point, we are all working harder, right? But for me, it's allowed more flexibility where I can go, you know, really, really strong for, you know, 4 or 5 hours in a row, take 2-hour break, then come back to it. I think in our supplier diversity world, you know, you leave a conference, you know, you're hoping that you can revive, and then we have the social moments where you build relationships. And that's the part that I miss the most, is just being able to build some of those authentic relationships with some of those downtime moments, because I think people, you know, especially in a conference environment, they want to get to the business and they want to get to, hey, you know, I want to find a new contract opportunity. And many times it's all about the relationships that you build and the patience that you have as you build these relationships. And the virtual world just creates a different dynamic. And so I would say that as you approach different organizations, as suppliers, as CAMSC constituents, just be mindful that in a virtual world, although we may be working harder, it doesn't mean that instantly our response time is going to increase, right? In fact, we're having when we get bogged down because so many people are at home and they're paying attention to, and I know you have sales and business development folks who CEOs of companies are saying, you got to get out there and sell. And in this environment, we can get inundated with the number of emails and phone calls because people think you're just sitting around twiddling thumbs, and that's just not the case. And I'm sure Ellyn has her own perspective as it relates to Magna and her purchasing team. But I'm enjoying this time. Honestly, I've after being in this role for 8 years and 8 years full of conferences, no offense, but I'm okay with taking a break from everybody live, face to face. I do miss some of my Canadian crew. When we always come over, I look forward to my train ride to Toronto and having this conference live, but I'm okay with a little bit of a break right now.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there has to be a certain degree of human empathy, and that's really shown itself during this whole pandemic. So Ellyn, how about you? Any thoughts on this virtual conference?
Yeah, I feel the same way as both these guys. Actually, it's kind of nice to take a break. In the position that I have, I travel internationally probably 6 times a year to Asia, to Europe, and obviously I haven't been able to do that. And actually, it's been kind of nice to kind of be home and be planted for a little bit, kind of take a step back. It's the same with the conference. I mean, we get to see each other. It's harder to build relationships this way, but it is what it is right now, and we just have to be flexible. And that's everything's all about change, and we just have to adjust.
Yes, absolutely. It is a time of change and pivoting. And over the past several months, we've really seen the resilience of our manufacturing sector pivoting and shifting their production lines to produce PPE equipment. We've seen a lot of that here in Canada, and I know that GM Oshawa, I think they produced 1 million face masks, and we've had a number of companies making face shields and ventilator parts. And I know, Ellyn, Magna as well. There's a number of plants up here that have also been participating in providing these really needed products. So what I'm wondering is, will this continue post-COVID? Like will the GM Oshawa plant continue to make masks? Will the Magna facilities that are making PPE equipment, will that continue going forward? Or is that just a short-term project?
I'll start, Kim. I think the mask project was probably one of my most, so I've led that project from an indirect and direct purchasing material side. And I will tell you that we started that project literally on March the 20th. We got a call that afternoon. It was a Friday afternoon. That said, hey, we're looking at building masks. Our partners in China had built masks, and they did it in 7 days, from zero design and material specs to a full mask. And the GM team in Warren, Michigan, actually was able to replicate with a lot of lessons learned from China, but we had to do it differently. We had to secure our own raw materials, our own equipment, and we actually successfully did that 30 minutes shy of 7 days. So there was a little bit of a competitive edge. We then took those same shared learnings and we brought them over to Oshawa, and very proud of the efforts that the Oshawa team put into replicating what we had done in Warren, Michigan. We also did the same in South America and in Mexico. We used basically the same supply base for both Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, and then we made some changes. But to answer your question, we right now are kind of wait and see mode. It's based on the pandemic. It's based on demand. We started out making masks simply to address the PPE demands and shortfalls that we saw in the medical community. So our mask in the beginning was 100% donations through the state of Michigan based on their priority list. Oshawa did something very similar with the government. And so what we're doing is right now in Warren, we're planning on stopping this production in September. But we've actually put a plan in place that says we'll go through the end of the year, depending on demand. So Oshawa, I'm not clear yet as to when the end of production. We're not going to build masks forever, but certainly depending on the demand within Canada, Oshawa will make that their own decision as it relates to how long they go. But it's been just a great learning experience. It's been a great one team. We talk about one team at GM experience where it's basically seamless. If you walk in the Oshawa facility, it is literally a mirror of what we did in Warren. And so, we got the right partners in place. We held a webinar back in April to share our blueprint with our supply base. Magna was a part of that moment. And we basically learn from each other. We talk offline to figure out how to improve, and we just want to make a difference in our community. So I'm very proud of the work that we did, but it will be temporary. We have to get back to making sure that we're building and selling the world's best vehicles and mobility experiences for our customers. But if we can help the community while we do it, then that's the blessed part about what we do.
Okay. And Ellyn, how about you? Is Magna going to continue, or is it just a short term?
It depends on each of the plants and the business units, right? So Magna is very decentralized. So it all depends on the business case for each. Again, we make car parts, right? And we pivoted during this time. And it not only has Magna stepped up to make different products, different PP stuff in certain areas, but also have used plants during this time where they had masks coming in, and they used some of our plants as distribution centers as well for the healthcare workers. But we've got to get back to business and quite honestly, get back to making what helps make us money at the end of the day, because this year's going to be a rough year financially for probably everybody.
Good. Okay, and yeah, getting back to business, it's interesting because I think the pandemic has also shown, for those that were bringing in parts or products from offshore, the need to possibly shift that to the North American landscape. So I'm not sure if any of you want to speak to that, the localization or bringing production back to North America, whether that's in Canada or the US or even Mexico for that reason, but bringing offshore manufacturing back home so that you're more in control of it and you're not dependent of, these faraway production facilities that aren't able to meet your demands. I don't know if that's something that possibly, Ellyn, you can speak to, or Chuck?
Sure. I think that for some of the categories that are out there, some of the that those are certainly going to move back. I mean, especially injection molding, several of those types of commodities will come back. But even the tariff situation in China has already made people move back, move some of their operations back and/or out of China. So I think it's going to be really interesting, and I hope that we all get to gain by it. That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, can you hear me okay? That's the first thing.
Yes. So far, so good.
All right, I'm gonna lean in close. So. No, I think for us, we purchase more so on a regional basis for our component parts and the things that we need to build our vehicles on a really heavily basis. Our local content runs, depending on the vehicle, runs somewhere between 70 and 80%. And by that means we're actually, procuring our parts where we're actually making our vehicles. There are some component parts that are coming from overseas, so I don't want to paint a picture that we're all local content, where everything that we produce in our vehicles are local. However, some of those items we are dictated by not only the commodity or the supplier and the relationships that we've built from our parent company, which of course is in Japan. So we, some of those components are actually just going to remain the way that they are, where TMC, which is our parent company, will not release us to manufacture those vehicles or produce those vehicles in the United States. So for us, frankly, we really haven't seen a grave change or a big gigantic push for localization. Of course, we are always looking to localize where we produce our vehicles, where it actually makes sense. So we're going to continue down that same path. We do have a localization initiative, so we want to push that 70 to 75% that I mentioned earlier. We want to push it to 80 or above 80% where we can. But again, it has to make sense for us from a standpoint of confidence, and depending on what that actual component part is, in terms of if we will actually determine on localizing those vehicles or those particular parts and components here in North America.
Okay, good. Okay, so what we had decided to do, we decided to have a Q&A midway through our session and then one at the end. So we really want the audience participation. So we're going to go to our Q&A right now. So if you've got any questions, please submit them, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. So I'm going to get to the first question we have right now, and forgive me for reading this. Sorry. Where do you see diverse suppliers fitting in the auto process, design, production? Are there any gaps where you can see a diverse supplier filling that gap? Reggie, I'm going to direct this one to you.
No problem. So I think you're going to hear Chuck probably and Ellyn give similar comments. I mean, there's some key categories that just do not have a good representation of diverse suppliers, and specifically within the CAMSC constituency. I mean, those are heavy in the electronic space, those that can support some of our autonomous or electrical vehicles. And so I think that's the biggest push, right, is we need to find opportunities in those. I mean, essentially, we know where the saturated markets are, right? And there's no disrespect to anyone's discipline who is in the staffing, promotional products, line of business, even stampings, right? But there's still going to be some opportunities, even if you look at a stamping environment. And going back to that localization question, for us, it's a matter of total enterprise cost. So how many stampers do we have that are within a 25, 50-mile radius of our facilities? Because that's where it's going to drive a sourcing decision based on big, bulky parts. So I think you have to look at what you do, right? And then how, for GM, we have a very strong mission of 0, 0, 0, zero emissions, zero congestion, and zero crashes. And the part of that mission is all about how do we bring technology to the table. And it's a bold mission statement from our CEO. And it's very aspirational as to how we're going to get there. But if you look at the technologies, especially when you talk about vehicle parts, we're looking for parts that will flow tier 2, tier 1, and everything below that as it relates to electrified vehicles, because we have a lineup by 2023 of over 20 vehicles, specifically in the Cadillac brand. When we talk about autonomous vehicles, there's all kinds of technology that are not existing today. And then more importantly, I need our supply base to look at the technologies that are going away because of these shifts in technology. And you got to be very mindful as to how relevant you will be, not next year, but 5 years from now and 8 years from now, because that's how Chuck and Ellyn, all of our teams are operating. It's not about what we're sourcing today, because most of us, what we're making decisions on in this next 6 months will be in production 3 to 4 to 5 years from now. And so I would say, and I'll let my counterparts kick in, but electronics and anything that supports autonomous vehicles, obviously we're still going to have seats, by great Magna seats, right? We're still going to have sunroofs, right? But what happens and what's changing in that technology, right? But for those who do steering wheels, maybe not so many, right? Because we go to our autonomous environment, but we'll still have self-driving cars. So I don't want us getting all caught up in the automotive evolution and missing the fact that there are still basic components and parts and services that we will always need. Trucks to be on the road to get parts to and from. The question is, what types of trucks? When we look at compressed natural gas, but they can only go in a certain, distance, right? When we look at electrical trucks, transit vehicles to get parts to and from so that we can address our sustainability efforts. So think through, as it relates to your core product or service, how relevant will it be 3, 5, 8, 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. Whatever product or services you're offering, ensuring that it is going to be relevant years from now. Okay, second question we have. With the changes taking place in the plants, with the focus being on specific products, what does this mean for diverse suppliers? Where do those opportunities lie? Chuck, perhaps you can respond to this one. Did we lose Chuck?
See, we have to adapt. I think we lost Chuck, Kim.
I think we lost Chuck.
Take it over to Ellyn. Take it away, Ellyn.
Take it away, Ellyn. Do you need me to repeat that question? Or are you good?
I'm good with that. We've got there are several opportunities that are happening, and it's it's a whole combination of things, and that are driving that. So, we had talked about, like, in the plastics arena, in the stamping arena, in die casting, and I'm coming from a component standpoint, but also in the software engineering. Software engineering is crucial, especially when it comes to ADAS products, the automatic driving systems. Software engineers are very difficult to find. And so those staffing companies that have software engineering or can support software engineering services, there's going to be wonderful opportunities for that. And that does speak to down the line, like Reggie mentioned before, it does speak to what's going to happen, 3, 5, 8, 10 years down the line.
And yet, so Kim, if I can chime in there, I think we got Chuck back.
We got Chuck back. Chuck is back.
I got kicked out for some reason. That's that technology thing.
Yeah, exactly. You adapted. You adapted, sir. Go ahead, take it back. Take it back. I was just trying to cover you, brother, till you got back on the system.
Chuck, you got this. You got this, Chuck. So I'm just going to repeat the question for you quickly so you can maybe give your thoughts on it. So with the changes taking place in plants with a focus on specific products, what does this mean for diverse suppliers? Where do you think the opportunities lie?
I don't know what everybody else said, but for us, it's business as usual. We pride ourselves in looking at ways of, one of our two founding principles within our organization are respect for people and Kaizen, or continuous improvement. So yes, we are in the beginning still, sometimes in some places, of a pandemic. And we're not going to let that stop us. I mean, GM and Magna and Toyota, as well as the other OEMs, we're getting back ramped up with regard to what we are all want to do, which is sell, vehicles or cars and trucks or make mobility solutions and those types of things. So from a diverse perspective, our plans remain the same, and because it matches what our core value is, which is they actually go ahead and continuously improve, as well as obviously the ultimate goal is to sell cars and trucks. So for us, from a diversity perspective, I don't think that really changes anything. At least I'm speaking for Toyota. It really hasn't changed things for Toyota. It's continued to say, okay, we've got to adapt, evolve. The mission's still the same. We still have a supplier diversity initiative. And we want to be, because at the end of the day, if we look at the circle of life with regard to what we do from a supplier diversity perspective, what we call it as Toyota at the top, we will source to the diverse community, and that diverse community will hopefully hire folks within their plants that that are diverse. Those diverse members will earn that money. They will take that home and hopefully create some disposable income, with ultimately coming back to buy Toyota and Lexus type vehicles. And so that's the same core value that I'm sure GM has, as well as some of my other colleagues have. The mission doesn't change, at least it doesn't change for Toyota. In fact, in light of what's going on in the United States, it's even lit a fire to do more from that perspective. So, for us at Toyota, the mission hasn't changed. Is it going to always be tough to become a Toyota supplier? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's because we have longstanding partnerships with our suppliers. We don't change suppliers at the drop of a hat. But I tell suppliers all the time that I meet for the first time, it's harder than hell to be a Toyota supplier. Very hard. But once you become or if you're fortunate enough to become a Toyota supplier, and I'm not being crass or being conceited about it, but once you become a Toyota supplier and become a part of the Toyota supply-based family, you can almost write your own ticket as long as you're keeping up with quality, cost, technology, and delivery. You can keep up and still be maintain a great relationship with us and a great partnership. So it really hasn't changed for us. We're going to continue the mission because it's important. We hear the phrase, it makes good business sense. That hasn't changed. It still makes good business sense to work with diverse suppliers.
And Kim, I'll chime in that to Chuck's point, nothing has changed as it relates to, in fact, yeah, there's a spotlight now on all of our diversity and inclusion activities, and supply chain is going to continue to be one of those key elements of it, because that's where we actually demonstrate the economic impact of inclusion, right, as it relates to the cyclical value proposition that Chuck just pointed out around our investment in diverse suppliers. But what I will say is that this pandemic has created an environment that has allowed us all to test the risk of our supply chains, right? And so when you think about, when we sit down in front of suppliers, and Ellyn will probably give you the same feedback, one of the first things I do is ask, who are your top 5 customers? And if I see that you are heavily automotive based, that's more risk for me, right? So if you're a supplier to Toyota, that gives you instant credibility that you can do the same for GM and vice versa, or Magna. But if your entire portfolio is built around the automotive industry and you hit this pandemic, and I think that's where we need to look at our products and services. When you talk about relevancy in the market, there's also risk in the market. And so this pandemic has taught us that the same lessons we've been trying to teach for years, which is diversify your portfolio. Imagine those who are 100% tied to the entertainment industry, right? Where is your revenue coming from now? And so we always look for a balanced book of business with our supply base, because that's where you understand how recession-proof or pandemic-proof, which is probably a new word that we've never had to think about, right, when it comes to your product or service, because none of us, I think, are pandemic-proof.
Oh. Reggie's frozen. Reggie looks frozen.
You have to have technology that insulates you. The trial or the challenge that I give to every supplier is to look at it from the customer's point of view. Anytime I meet with a supplier, especially if we're at live trade shows, I'm like, come sit in my vehicle and you tell me how your product or service adds value to this customer experience. So now take a look at when you're in a pandemic where no one's going to dealerships to buy vehicles. How does your product or service going to add value when you have a gap in being able to connect with your customers, right? And do you have technology or services that we've learned through this pandemic will actually help me reach my customers, helps me stay in front of, Chuck's team did a wonderful job doing launches virtually using automotive news, right? Who's behind the scenes doing that? So I don't think that this is a conversation around where do diverse suppliers fit in the midst of a pandemic, because it doesn't matter. Our diversity efforts are going to continue to get ratcheted up because now there's a spotlight on, hey, wow, you guys been doing this for 52 years and it was born out of the same type of issues minus a pandemic. So now you add a pandemic on top of civil unrest due to economic and social injustices. Now you got people thinking, yeah, we got to do supplier diversity. That doesn't change. I don't think Chuck has lost anybody. I haven't lost anybody, thankfully, in terms of budget cuts. But there are companies who are instantly taking out supplier diversity departments because they see them as non-value add. And then when they get back and understand from their customer's point of view or their competition's point of view that they have to continue driving supplier diversity, all of a sudden it gets back to the forefront of people's minds. So what, I think that, great organizations like CAMSC continue to do is to help companies and suppliers understand how to navigate the waters despite this storm of a pandemic. And again, the things that we're dealing with in the United States right now.
Thanks, Reggie. Yeah, I think that just touching back on what Chuck had mentioned a little bit earlier about wanting to deal with Toyota, I think a lot of diverse suppliers need to consider who it is they're approaching, whether, do they really necessarily want to do business with GM or Toyota directly, or do they want to do business with the tier one folks? That's something that I think it's overlooked. There's just as much money in the tier one base as there is in the OEM base, and it may be easier to get into the tier one versus yourselves. I think it's really important for diverse suppliers to do their due diligence and do their homework when they are having their conversations with vendors such as yourselves, OEMs. But I remember for myself when I was attending all the events, I was always curious as to the process. What does your procurement process look like when it comes to diverse suppliers? Could you maybe go a little bit over that? So your procurement process and the supplier diversity programs. Ellyn? Are we good?
Well, from our standpoint, it's, obviously going to the trade shows, or now it's virtual trade shows, et cetera, and opening up to new supplier opportunities, and then making sure they get into the right division and/or the right category, director category management, to be able to take that and run with it. So, the process is it's the same with all suppliers, honestly. It's you bring them in, you got to make sure they're qualified, and both financially and to Reggie's point, that they're diversified within their portfolio as well, and bring them in, and then make sure to introduce them, and then it's up to them. Then it's up to them. You've got to be competitive, and you've got to have some technology, and it's we can open the doors, but it's up to the suppliers.
And Ellyn, maybe you can chime in, because you mentioned earlier about you having a decentralized purchasing organization and operations, and Chuck mentioned the same thing in terms of how they source. Because I think that's important for our supply base to understand the differences between centralized global purchasing organization like a GM, decentralized, because that very much changes the process that Kim is speaking to in terms of how you engage. So maybe you can speak on that from Magna's point of view.
Yes, it's there's each plant can do their own. From a Magna Electronics standpoint, we're more centralized, so nothing gets sourced in my categories globally without my approval, my stamp of approval. And basically, I introduce the suppliers, I create the approved supplier list, et cetera. But for a lot of divisions, they have, a purchasing manager in a plant can make the decision as far as what they need. And each plant is so different because each plant requires different things. We have a global supplier requirements manual. We have global warranty and liability agreements, terms and conditions. But that's pretty much, from a Magna standpoint, that's pretty much as centralized as you're going to get. You're going to have these same terms and conditions, the same legal conditions to work with us, but it's going to vary difference by plant, and it's it's with each plant too. And I think it's also servicing any company, is that you have to be able to adjust to what that facility needs.
Yeah, if I can add to it, we are. I guess we're a little bit of both. We're decentralized from a regional perspective, but we are centralized within that region, if you follow me. So our purchasing members handle all procurement for all of North America. So that's Canada, U.S., and Mexico. So what we try to do is get a game. My team, from a diversity perspective, has a lot of interaction with our procurement groups and understanding, if it's parts and components, when that part is actually going to be needed on one particular vehicle, what the current supply base is like, and do we have any diverse candidates within those categories. On an indirect basis, those are more cyclical or more contract-based type things. So those may have a shelf life or term life of 1, 2, maybe 3 years or 4 years or something like that. And so we have to understand the next time that contract comes up, are we including diverse candidates within that RFQ process? So Ellyn brings up a great point with regard to our role, and I think all three of us will agree, is our job is to where it makes sense and there's a business need, to pull those diverse candidates and put them in front of our procurement folks to say, hey, here's a qualified candidate. And luckily for my team, half of my team has actual procurement experience, including myself. So I used to work in purchasing, frankly, way too much of it. So I dived back into the supplier diversity piece to say, okay, I've got that expertise, and we can kind of look at a supplier and say, okay, just like the question Reggie asked, who are your top 5 customers? Are you all in automotive? i.e. are your, all your eggs in one basket. And we want to be able to put those folks in front of the procurement members and get to the plate. I'm an old football coach, so I'll say, I'm going to get you on the field. I'm going to set you up to bat. It's up to you to either go score that touchdown or hit the ball. And outside of that, a lot of misnomers is that the supplier diversity contact makes the actual sourcing decision. That's the procurement team's role. We will be advocates for you where we see that it makes sense and where we see that you have some capability, and we see that you're not a Me Too supplier. And I don't mean that in the other Me Too sense. I'm talking about, hey, I'm doing the exact same thing that this guy is doing or this lady is doing. I'm going to do that too. Well, we don't source that way. I don't think any of us source that way. We're not adding to say, oh, we added a diverse supplier. We're adding somebody, just like Reggie says, and say, how do what you produce, is that actually going to be able to provide value to what we are selling? So we do a lot of homework, before we would go to procurement or trade show and that type of thing. We'd say, okay, what are the commodities that we think that we're going to need ahead of time and what we may be looking for? Uh-oh, did y'all lose me? Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay.
What we may be looking for, and then that gives us some advantage with regard to, hey, I'm specifically looking for this. If I meet a supplier, I've got a potential business need right now. This is kind of, I don't want to call it fast track, but this I can help you get in front of some procurement folks because we're looking for that particular commodity. So that's kind of how we operate. Again, we're centralized on a regional basis. I don't source anything from a global perspective like GM does. Sometimes I wish we did because it provides more value and we can, be more competitive in certain. But it makes it whether you're centralized or decentralized.
And Kim, let me give some again, I'll just highlight how GM does it, right? So global architectures, right? We're going to take our small SUVs and we may build that in 4 different regions, right? China, the US, we may build it Canada as well as South America. So that means that global architecture for any parts specifically and services related to that, but particularly parts, we're trying to use common parts across all of that. That's how we leverage our scale and actually realize the economic benefit of building vehicles all across the world. So for the most part, we have regions that will do purchasing, but most of the global commodity managers and global directors sit within the US. And so that means that from a supply diversity perspective, I have 150 purchasing teams that I support purely on the direct material side. Now, that doesn't count the aftermarket because for every one of those teams, I have a team in Grand Blanc, Michigan, who is sourcing aftermarket parts. So if you're a supplier, so Magna has built a part for us for 5 years on a program, that program goes away. They still have an obligation to provide service parts. But in some cases, because the volumes become so low, we're able to either get a batch build from Magna or they say, hey, you can take this, we resource it with a build-to-print design to another supplier. So now I have another 100 or so teams that actually replicate the 150 core teams. And that's important to understand because what we do at GM is I go out and I do a survey to all of my teams, probably annually, and we ask, do you have an appetite for new suppliers? The vast majority say no, right? And we do a basic red, yellow, green analysis to say how many of our purchasing teams, red, don't want any new suppliers, yellow have a niche sub-commodity within a greater commodity that they're looking for, green are looking for new suppliers. And we actually take a very pragmatic approach at understanding which teams have an appetite for new suppliers. So when we come to trade shows, virtual or physical, we have an idea as to who's actually looking. Now, once we get you in the door, to my counterparts' earlier comments, it's a matter of helping us understand how that value is going to be translated. Now, here's my thing. If you have your number one customer is already in the automotive sector, then all I want to know is what are the top 3 KPIs, key performance indicators that they're measuring your success by, so that I can compare that with the that I have in that commodity, because to new supplier in means I got to make my purchasing team really uncomfortable And that's why it's paramount that as a supplier, you are able to communicate and reflect your proven track record of success in a particular commodity or service and being able to deliver that. Because for us to take on that risk, because it's a diverse supplier, that doesn't make sense. We're not going to expose our customers to risk because we have taken a chance as it relates to quality, service, technology, and even pricing. And so if I can challenge the supply base to any piece of homework, because we always say that, do your homework, but we very rarely tell you what the homework is. A big part of that is once you understand a company's purchasing setup, centralized, decentralized, what types of teams do they, how do they buy? It's helpful when suppliers tell me, hey, I do business with Toyota, and the fact is that I work with the commodity manager that's this commodity, because then I can relate that to where GM buys it. So within our direct material space, if you take the vehicle and explode it, we have a chassis and body structure team. We have an electrical and advanced technology team. We have an interior and exterior team. I've got a logistics team. I've got a customer care and after sales team. And I have an engine, transmission, and thermal team. So those executive directors are who I interface with the most to understand their sourcing strategies. And then as we introduce new suppliers, we go to either the purchasing director or the commodity manager or even the buyers. I have a supplier diversity champion or lead that is represented in each one of those, what we call SMTs or systems management teams / business units. And then we have a global purchasing and manufacturing services group, which is our indirect team, that's the organization I report up through. So anything that has to do with our plant operations or services that go across the board, that's within my executive director's span of control. So all indirect falls underneath the team that I directly represent. But I represent I support two purchasing organizations that have the same goal, which is to support the product and the services for all of our manufacturing facilities globally. But our diversity efforts are U.S. and Canadian based. So Kim, hopefully that helps.
Definitely. But I think something else that we as certified suppliers need to keep in mind is that there's hundreds of us, and there's only, you and your team that are handling the diversity component for your organization. So I think we all need to have a little bit of patience when working through this process, right? So we're not going to get immediate responses back from you, so that takes time. So there's a degree of patience with regards to dealing with you guys. All right, so we're down to 10 minutes now. So I just want to go to the questions that we have. How has the pandemic affected your current suppliers, and will there be a demand for more diverse suppliers? Or whichever one of you would like to take that one first.
I mean, I'll jump in here. I don't, this hasn't changed. I think the entire market was put on pause, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're a diverse supplier or not. We're all trying to get back to selling vehicles. And then to Ellyn's point, she can't sell any parts unless we sell vehicles. So our number one priority right now is to people's health, obviously, and we've all contributed in different ways. The second thing is to make sure that as we get our operations back up to full production, that we do that safely. So a big part of all of our cultures are to make sure that our employees within our manufacturing facilities have been safe. So I don't think that this pandemic it hasn't affected. What I will say is that the smaller businesses are suffering. Obviously, they didn't have the cash. I think that, especially in the U.S., and I'm not so knowledgeable about Canadian federal government support that's been provided. I know we had several, different types of programs to support small businesses, and hopefully within the Canadian government, there's been similar activities. I think, I talked to my supplier risk management team, and above all else, cash flow and banking relationships are the two most important elements to navigate through these waters. And so when I look at the supplier's viability and health, I do expect to see trouble. That still hasn't even, because if you think about the gap over the last 4 months, right, some of you are on 30, 60, 90, and even 120-day payment terms. So literally your cash has dried up in the last 4 months, and yet you won't see any new cash, right, until you ship some parts last few weeks and you still won't get paid for that for 60 days. So this is where it is critically important that your banking relationships are strong, that you understand what types of federal or local funding, supplementary funding programs are available. And we're keeping an eye on our diverse suppliers. But again, to Chuck's point, we only have so many resources, right? So what we've tried to do is reach out to some of our key top suppliers, but I'm sure there are many suppliers. And for me, I can tell you, to be very honest, if you're doing $2 million or less with GM, I have very little visibility about what's going on in your business, right? And nor do I have a magic solution to fix the problem. However, the three elements that my supplier risk management team said, again, banking relationships, cash on hand, and raising your hand early if you have trouble. Because the last thing you want to do is approach your customers in a panic. You want to look at those first two elements and then come to your customers early and let them know, I'm in trouble. This is not a time to be prideful and to try to hide your financials, try to hide your troubles in terms of employee retention. There's a lot of different dynamics. You need to tell your customers up front, this is where my problems are, because many of us have supplier risk management teams who have access to different solutions that you may not be aware of. So you got to raise your hand. Yes, it's a sign, don't take it as a sign of weakness, because we're all dealing with it. Now, certainly if you've come to us more than a few times prior to the pandemic, then that's going to be an issue, and we're going to throw up a flag. But you've got to be honest with your customers, especially your top tier customers, about where you sit in terms of financial viability, banking relationships, because it is going to be critically important that if you fail or fall because of a lack of people, a lack of cash, or just a lack of vision and direction and leadership, you won't come back from this.
Okay. All right, I've got one last question that I really would like each of you to answer to. We've got 8 minutes left. I think this is really relevant going forward, especially for the automotive industry. So the pandemic has really changed the way that people will commute, whether or not they feel comfortable taking public transit versus the safety of their own car. This could dramatically change the whole notion of carpooling and ride sharing. Has your company recognized this? And if so, will this change your strategy moving forward? I know we'll start off with Ellyn, and then we'll go to Chuck, and then end up with Reggie. All right, so 8 minutes to go, guys.
Yes, as a ADAS supplier, so we're very deep into the automatic driving, right? And especially in my arena, in the electronics arena. And we're seeing differences where, for instance, in Europe, Daimler and BMW were sharing resources to be able to develop the technology, and now they've kind of split that off because they have to conserve cash, so they're not putting cash into that type of thing. We're seeing where some of the used car sales are increasing because people want to drive by themselves because they feel much safer driving by themselves. So I think we're going to see a big difference. I know within Magna's purview, it was mentioned that we might not go after level 5, right? And it was announced that we might just stick with level 3 and 4 because 5 is there's so much that you have to put into it, so much money that you have to, and what portion of vehicles are really going to do that? Because no matter what happens, if you have a self-driving vehicle, fully self-driving vehicle, you have to have a backup where somebody can take the wheel anyway, from a safety standpoint. So that's pretty much it within the driver assistance systems. It's changing. They're talking about backing off dates from different things. Now I know to Reggie's point with like Cadillac, because I know we do some work with Cadillac brand and such. And Cadillac's always kind of been ahead of the curve. We've got some new stuff with Toyota coming up as well, some kind of cool technology. And those things are still on track to be done. So I think it's more the futuristic level 4, level 5 autonomous driving systems that are going to be kind of backed off with dates.
Yeah, if I can, and I'll 100% agree with what Ellyn is saying. We had a professor come in from the University of Michigan who made a presentation, probably to all of Toyota, or at least the purchasing side. Sorry, about, I don't know, it might have been 7, 8, 9 months ago, And from that level 4 and 5 that Ellyn is referring to, that in theory, you know, the industry really in and of itself is really only about at a 2, between a 2 and a 3, somewhere around there, at least for us. And that technology, while it will continue, it is going to happen. We will get through the pandemic and through these challenges that we have, that we're experiencing right now. But at some point in time, we have to realize what's going on today. So in essence, for us, this is not meant to be braggadocious or anything like that. We reduced our forecasting during those critical months of March, April, May, and into June from a forecasting standpoint. And by happenstance, quality vehicles, the ownership loyalty and that type of thing, Toyota far exceeded those forecasts. So our challenge right now for us is really within our supply base and within our production facilities to get back up and ramp up to try and meet that demand. There's been you know, for the first time, one of our vehicles, I saw one of our production results for June. I can't remember which vehicle it was. It might have been the RAV4. Our hybrid vehicle, for the first time ever, outsold the gasoline vehicle. So that tells us, hey, people are getting in their cars and driving themselves. They're not spending a lot of time either, you know, those long trips where you would say, hey, I'm headed to the airport, I'm on an airplane. They're saying, no, we're going to gas up, load up, and get on the road, and then we're just going to make that travel or that medium, be it by vehicle, that we're driving ourselves, just from a safety standpoint. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I flew last week for the first time in 5 months. I was scared to death. I'm not going to lie. And that was with all the precautions that could actually be taken care of. And I thought to myself, man, should I just got in the car and just take a week off and just drove? I went to go see my granddaughter in Texas. But I said, you know what, this might work out. But you know, on the flip side of that, I saw this morning on the Today Show where the CEO of Delta, they're losing $27 million a day because people are getting in their vehicles and they're driving to their location. So the rideshare thing, I don't know that people feel comfortable with that. A lot of people, you know, as Ellyn said, yeah, we may have autonomous driving vehicles, you know, down the road at some point in time. Where, you know, I don't know how old everybody is listening, but I'm in my 50s, headed towards 60s. I remember the television show The Jetsons. So I remember stepping out and getting in that thing, you know, and they just get dropped off at work and everything was all hunky-dory. You know, strangely as that sounds, that may happen one day. That may happen one day. But it's a situation of somebody taking control of what their surroundings are and not calling up an Uber, not calling up a Lyft, and that type of thing. Say, hey, I'm going to get in somebody else's vehicle. I don't know if it's been sanitized. I don't know who was in it before me. I don't know what this person driving is doing. So, you know, those types of things, I think from a pandemic standpoint, I think it's going to be, you know, the rideshare thing is not going to have an impact, at least negatively, for the automotive industry, I don't think. So, sorry, I'll shut up and let Reggie handle.
Yeah, okay, Reggie, actually, you know what? Maybe you could, we've got less than 2 minutes left. Pent-up demand. Do you feel there is pent-up demand out there? And what are you thinking for auto sales after this pandemic sort of starts to come to an end, if it will?
Well, I'm hopeful, but again, we just don't know, right? I think to what Chuck said, I think one of the things that our aftermarket team is really focused, because you think that with all these people unemployed, they can't buy new vehicles, but they got to fix the current ones, right? And so I think that our aftermarket group is very focused in on how to make sure our customers are able to fix their vehicles if necessary. And then on the new car sales, obviously with the lack of public transportation, to Chuck's point and Ellyn's point, we're hoping that this turns into an opportunity where we do sell more new vehicles because people want a comfort level. I mean, we put different, you know, but I think there's an opportunity for how do you sanitize a vehicle. So I've got suppliers that have introduced different sprays and different applications to make sure that not only does it kill the virus, but it kind of sanitizes the environment for multiple days. And that's the kind of thinking we have to be in. I mean, we wound down our Maven rideshare program. It just didn't work for us. We learned some valuable lessons. So I think that's just what this is going to be about, is learning some new lessons and adapting to the market. So thank you, Kim. And thank you to my fellow panelists for what I hope was an informational moment.
Yes. Thank you to CAMSC. Thank you to Ellyn from Magna, Chuck from Toyota, and Reggie from GM. Thank you very much. Wishing everybody good health, keep well, and hope to see you next year.
Yeah. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.